inviting me. Thanks for the great intro. But if my mother and grandmother heard this introduction, they would be going like this. Anybody know what this is behind their back? And they would be going, poo, poo, poo. My grandmother wouldn't knock wood, but my mother would. And my mother would give the advice, keep a low profile. Now, my mother was shorter than I. She didn't admit to being superstitious, but she knocked so much wood that we called her the woodpecker behind her back. My grandmother, I was convinced, had a sinus condition or too much phlegm because she was always going poo, poo, poo. Sometimes when she wanted to be fancy, she said poi, 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 and I thought it had to do with Hawaiian food. Upstairs, I lived in Rockaway, and I know I have some Rockawayites here. I lived on Amstel Boulevard, and I lived in a tiny three-family house with 4 generations tucked in, and there were 3 matriarchs. On the bottom was my mother, who called herself the mini matriarch. Next level was my grandma Tilly, who looked like Zsa Zsa Gabor. She was not an old-fashioned Jewish grandmother type, and upstairs was Double G, my great-grandmother. Nobody admitted to being superstitious, but we all were, including myself, and I made fun of my parents and my grandparents for being superstitious because that was like old school and old country and old-fashioned, and I was young, and what did I know? Actually, my mother, who pointed that pointed finger and had that evil eye, said, just wait, and she was right. And my mother, by the way, used to go to the synagogue. She lived in Lake Worth. And I'll tell you a little bit about her and my grandmother. But before I do, when we start talking about the evil eye, and I'm wearing it, by the way, Salvador Dali's version of the evil eye that he made for his wife. It's a clock because the evil eye is timeless. We're living in a high-tech age, but the evil eye is alive and well and living in Boca Boynton, Green Acres, West Palm Beach, and it's universal. And the evil eye predated the Bible and all religions, and we're going to talk about how the evil eye has existed and why. You heard about the superstition, step with your right foot to start the trip out right. You never left home in Rockaway unless, even if you were going on a simple trip on the A train, you know, to Brooklyn or to Orbax or remember Klein's 14th Street. My mother didn't go to the main store, she went to the boutique version, which was the annex, if anyone remembers that, where we bought slightly irregulars or seconds. My mother thought it was designer and it was exciting. So the night before in my house, when you talked about where we were going and the trains that we were going to take, my grandmother would go, you know, Kanahara, it should happen, we should only go. And I would say, Mom, where are we going? We're going on the subway. I mean, it's no big deal. We're taking a bus into Mays, Brooklyn. And my mother would say, bite your tongue. Now, I didn't understand that my mother's tongue wasn't chopped liver from all the biting. If you said anything, you know, that was good, knock wood. If you said anything bad, bite your tongue. But we're coming on to New Year's. So I want to start, before we talk about bad luck and the evil eye and doing the right thing and the wrong thing, and God forbid you spill the salt, I want to wish you a happy and a healthy new year. We should live and be well. God bless, Kanahara, poo poo poo. Any of you having relatives come down to visit you for the Christmas holidays or the Hanukkah holidays? Hopefully, I wish for good luck that they're coming on their mileage, not yours. I hope you've checked out the washing machine because the towel situation, you know what that is. I only wash once, then I just throw it in the dryer. But don't throw me under the bus when you see my relatives here next week. The children and grandchildren should be gifted and talented. They should all win scholarships so we don't have to pay for college for them. And that's my whole lecture. The rest is just commentary. And we're going to comment how superstitions seep into our lives, especially with New Year's coming, all around the world, no matter what culture, no matter what ethnicity, no matter what religion, there is a New Year's or New Year's Eve culture. And if you look at, my husband is a prize-winning illustrator, and he was nice enough to do a cartoon for us. So therefore, I don't have to read notes, I could just look at the cartoon. And on the top, we have a woman with an evil eye throwing water out the window. Did we find her? Okay, if you come from the Caribbean, especially from Cuba, or if you come from Puerto Rico, at 12 o'clock, right before 12 o'clock, you clean the house, and then the dirty water gets thrown out the window, because that's all your bad luck. Now, underneath that, you'll see a guy eating grapes. Puerto Rico, Cuba, Colombia, and a lot of other Mediterranean, well, it's actually from the Mediterranean, but it came over to the Caribbean, 12 sweet grapes. If you think that's unusual, think about Jewish people having raisins and apples with honey for a sweet year. The 12 grapes are 12 sweet years. Now the problem is, if you're Puerto Rican or you're Cuban, you're going to want to take a trip. And to wish good luck for the trip, you see the little guy with the suitcase, holding the suitcase? He's going to walk around the block at 12 o'clock 3 times. The problem is he's going to get soaking wet because everybody's throwing the dirty water out the window. And some people say if you get dosed by the water, you're not going on the trip. All right, now if you're from Brazil, on New Year's Day, you're going to go out to propitiate the gods of the water and the gods of the sea, and you're going to have 12 white, beautiful flowers and send them out on the water. If you're African American, on New Year's Day, you're going to have black-eyed peas for fertility, and we're going to come back and talk a lot about fertility, because a lot of the good luck charms started out as fertility, and some of this could be quite shocking. I didn't tell Diane, who had me come today, that this is going to be sort of a hard hour, but there were no children here, so I think we could handle some of the things. If you're Jamaican, you're going to paint your house so that you're starting the new year off fresh. In a lot of cultures, including Jewish people, want to wear something new for the new year to start out fresh. And we can go on and on because there is a linkage. There's a linkage between the fruitcake that the Christians eat for Christmas and the honey cake that the Jews eat. And one of the things I want to come from this lecture is we're living in very divisive times. And understanding where the superstitions come from is a way for us to have commonality. It's a way for us to erase the boundaries. And that's one of the things I want you to get from this. We'll start with a little definition. A superstition is an attempt to control an uncontrollable event in your favor. Now, a superstition is also embedded in the culture because some of these are thousands of years old. There are predictive superstitions. She loves me not, plucking the flowers. If you're Russian, and you better have good teeth for this, they have predictive superstitions when they make chicken soup. They make chicken soup instead of matzo balls. If you're not Jewish, they make dumplings, and inside the dumpling is going to be your luck or bad luck for the coming year. For instance, if there's a string in it, you're going to have a long life. If it's very, very peppery and you have to cough, it means you're going to have a temper tantrum. If you want to interpret it in a good way, you can have passion. And if you're going to be rich for the coming year, you're going to have a coin, but you could also break a tooth while you're eating it. So that could be good luck and bad luck. And speaking about money, there's a lot of superstitions for New Year's about money. For instance, I was reading the New York Times last year about Mexico. In Mexico, the business, they were having an economic downturn, and the business section of the Times had a headline. The headline was, "The red underpants are not being sold this New Year's." So I said, okay, red underpants, they're not being sold, why not? I read the story. The Mexicans and a lot of Latins, and in Spain as well, believe that on New Year's Eve, if you want to meet the love of your life, you wear red underpants. This is for men, by the way. And if you really are desperate, you don't go on any of the dating sites, you wear the underpants backwards, which might be a problem if they have to go to the bathroom, but okay. Hopefully, if you're married, your wife does not see that you're wearing red underpants, because then you could be in major trouble. However, if you want to have wealth for the coming year, you wear yellow underpants. So Mexico was selling out on the yellow underpants and no one bought the red underpants. So now it's not just a Bubba mindset, you know, all the superstitions my mother had. It seems that there are other superstitions. And before I go into the traditional superstitions that we all know about, the New York Times occasionally writes about superstitions that are going on right now. For instance, Fordham University has a phenomenal basketball team, right? For years, they're famous for it. Well, it just so happens that last year, before a very big playoff, the Italian tenor, who was an opera star, who sang the Star-Spangled Banner, and always has done that, had laryngitis. And he called up at the last minute and he said, I can't come to sing the Star-Spangled Banner. And they were in a panic because it was a very big game. They had been losing and, you know, they were really worried. P.S. They couldn't get anybody. They called around. And someone called the coach and said, look, we have a rabbi and a cantor from the Bronx, who the cantor is willing to come and sing the Star-Spangled Banner. He doesn't know if he's going to do a great job. They were desperate. They said, hire him. He comes, he sings, and guess what? They won. So they temporarily fired the tenor from the Metropolitan Opera. Now, when they interviewed the coach, they said, are you being superstitious? He says, well, we're not really superstitious, but the cantor did such a great job, we're taking a break. P.S. When they started losing, they went back to the tenor from the Metropolitan Opera. In the Bronx, there were a lot of superstitions, and there was an article in the Times about Bronx superstitions in the Bronx court. And I happen to have a friend who is Kinahuri. He was just voted in as a judge at the Supreme Court of the New York State, and he's in the Bronx, so he verified this. There's a lawyer, if you have a problem, if you're a hip-hop guy or you have a drug bust, you get Murray. And they call him get out of jail in a hurry, Murray. Or don't worry, we're getting Murray. Anyway, Murray was interviewed in the Times and they said, what's the secret of your success? Because he gets off a lot of people. He says, it's the red tie I wear. Now, Murray happens to be Jewish. He didn't call it a Kinahuri tie. But my friend who's the judge and knows Murray says, when Murray's wearing that tie, you know that you have a big case on your hands. So do the judges do anything? According to the Times, they're superstitious too. When they have a really serious case, they must eat a Reuben sandwich from a certain deli in the Bronx. If they don't have it, they're in a terrible mood and they're knocking wood and they're spitting or doing whatever they want to do. So that was in the Times. They also talked about President Obama, who claims he's not really superstitious. However, when he runs for office, he has got to play pickup game of basketball, wearing the clothes he wore in college. And you know how skinny he is. So, and my son went to college, by the way, law school with President Obama, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. He has to play with the same guys, and David Axelrod, who at the time was his advisor, said he would shave off his beard and mustache if Obama lost. So Obama had, he said, the only election he ever lost in his political career is when he didn't play basketball on the day of the election. So then they interviewed, the Times interviews Romney. Romney says he's not superstitious either. This is the night before the election. So they asked him, did you write a resignation speech? So he looks at the reporter and he says, listen, if I don't make it, I know what I have to say. He says, but I'm not putting it down on paper. Now, he didn't say knock wood or I'm not superstitious, but it certainly sounded like I'm not going to push the evil eye, into this. So now let's talk about the evil eye. The evil eye is something that is thousands of years old and it predates the Bible. And how do we know this? We have carbon dating because there are pictures of it that go back thousands and thousands and thousands of years, 8,000, 9,000 years. And what is the belief? The belief is that there are leprechauns or gremlins or fairies or goblins who live in trees. Now, there was a worship of nature and a belief that living in trees and woods and flowers were gods and goddesses and these little beings who had nothing to do. They didn't have an iPhone that they were constantly going on. They didn't have email, they didn't have movies, they didn't have e-entertainment, they didn't have Donald Trump giving you all kinds of excitement. What they were doing was listening in to us. And if somebody like me said, oh, I know I'm getting into Cornell, or I know I'm having a prom date, the evil eye would go, what is Carol talking about? That's not going to happen. So the idea is you knocked wood so they couldn't hear the bragging. Now, that's the folklore thing. What's the psychology of it? The psychology of it, according to social anthropologists and psychiatrists and psychologists, and the mavens who know about superstitions and folklore say that there is a feeling that we have that we don't want to brag and we don't want to sound too sure of ourselves. This is the complete antithesis of Facebook. My parents and grandparents would be horrified. How many here have their grandchildren on Facebook? Listen, one of the good things is if you want to find out what's going on in the family, go on Facebook. If they befriend you. If. It's a big brag fest. You know, everybody likes everything, everyone looks so great, you know, they have great pictures. If my grandmother, who happened, she should rest in peace, be a beautiful woman, if she was on Facebook, she probably would have had roots coming out, no makeup on, because she didn't want anyone to give her a canary, which was her version of a kinahara. But she didn't like to speak Yiddish because she was a German Jew, only the Russians said kinahara. Anyway. So there's the belief in the evil eye, and the evil eye did not die out. And believe me, the Jewish religion, Catholicism, and Islam tried to knock out all these heathen beliefs. But they were so ingrained in the culture. Why? Because they were passed from generation to generation, mainly through women, and even recently, and because they connected us to our past, you know, and a lot of them seeped into the culture, and we don't even realize that it has anything to do with superstition. For instance, I went to school wearing penny loafers. Anybody remember penny loafers? They're coming back. I heard Gucci or Prada is making a version. They'll probably be $1,000 loafers, you know, with a $50 coin in it. What was that all about? Well, the idea, the superstition going back for years and years and centuries is you walk on money. I used to write bridal articles for Newsday in the New York Times. Old, new, borrowed, blue, if you were British, a 6 pence in your shoe. So the penny loafer was a fad version. Now I'm wearing an evil eye bracelet. I'm wearing all my props. I usually don't have all this stuff on. I have a wooden necklace with a knot from China. And as I said, most of the superstitions were invented by the Asians or the Africans, and the ones from Asia came on the medieval version of the internet known as the Silk Road. They were brought back with the fairy tales, which were not born, you know, Grimm did not write them or make them up. Most of them came from Asia and different parts of the world. And the fairy tales are not about happily ever after. You know, that's like a smokescreen. What they're really about is follow the money. Because you'll notice none of the gals married anybody who was a plumber or an out-of-work actor. And it's not necessarily about true love. But the fairy tales are embedded with superstitious warnings, which we're going to discuss. But I digress. Let's go back to the evil eye. So the whole idea was you distracted the evil eye and you lied to the evil eye. Remember I said that superstitions can be predictive? They can also be preventative or protective. For instance, my mother and grandmother, and probably your family, and if you go to Italy, don't tell an Italian mother that their son is very handsome. If you said it to my grandmother, her answer was, my enemy should be so ugly. And she turned the baby on her stomach. And she did poo, poo, poo. One of my relatives who thought my sister was a beautiful baby entered her in a beauty baby contest in the A&P in Rockaway. My grandmother, when she went shopping and saw my sister's picture, ripped it off the wall. The manager wanted to call the police. What are you doing? She says, I don't want anybody to look at it and say anything about it, because the idea was the evil eye would be listening in. So what did you do when a baby was born? What did you put in the crib? You put a red ribbon in the crib. And if you'll notice on my illustration, you see the baby smiling because there's a red bow. What I really should do, you know, there's adult coloring books now. I should give out crayons. And as I discuss each superstition, we could color it in. Is that a good idea? Okay, someone gave me that yesterday, by the way, as an idea when I gave these out. So while I was laughing at my mother with the bite your tongue and everything else, we had a certain philosophy in the house. For instance, laugh before breakfast, cry before dinner. Remember that one? Now what does that tell you? You get up in a good mood and you're going to have nothing but trouble for the rest of the day. My grandmother, life begins with an I and it ends with a Gewalt. Does that sound like a happy life to look forward to? And when you're finished with that, don't count your chickens before they hatch. Okay, what does that mean? You can't depend upon anything. You're making plans for a wedding, you're making plans for a celebration, or to go into Loman's, Brooklyn, where you better wear clean underwear because they have no dressing rooms. Remember that, ladies? I mean, that was what my mother was worried about. If you get hit by a car, you should have clean underwear. Not that you should survive the accident. So then my mother wanted to know why my sister and I were so anxious all the time. This kind of philosophy going on. And it was almost like black magic because everything had a subtext of what you should do and you shouldn't do. And if you asked them about it, nothing was good. Why can't you put shoes on the table? It was always death. Why did you have to not come back if you had to go someplace? You started out with your right foot. If God forbid you had to come back, you had to sit down. Why? I asked my mother. She says, I don't know why. I asked Grandma. I asked Grandma. She says, ask my mother. I asked my great-grandmother. She says, because that's the way you do it. Well, I did research about it. The idea is that the evil eye should not think you're stupid and unthinking. That you purposely wanted to come home and sit down. Same thing with spilling the salt. Anybody remember with the spilling the salt? What shoulder do you throw it over? Anybody here that's a lefty? I feel sorry in a way for lefties. You know, it's a faux pas, it's a left-handed compliment. So what's the deal? Do you see the guy throwing the salt with that sickly smile, throwing the salt over his left shoulder? What's that about? And in my family, we didn't stop with that. We went even further with the salt. Salt was the most precious possession going back thousands of years, even hundreds of years. It was the way we spiced up the foods. It was the way we preserved the foods. It was a very important substance. So if you spilled the salt, and the evil eye saw what kind of a schmendrick you were that you spilled the salt, you're showing him that you wanted to spill the salt, and you're taking the salt and you're throwing it over your left shoulder to give the devil his due. If you're Irish, you're throwing the salt over your left shoulder, hoping it goes into the evil eye, so he blinds him from doing anything. I'm only giving you 1 or 2 reasons. There are 10 reasons for everything. Now, in my family, we had an Aunt Bertie. Aunt Bertie, my grandmother said, could give you a canary. Now, it just so happened she gave us a parakeet once, so I didn't really understand what that was about. So Friday night, if she came for dinner, and my grandmother, who she should rest in peace, and by the way, that's a superstitious affectation. The reason you say rest in peace is because when you mention the dead, you call them to you, and you don't want that to happen. Maybe she's playing poker up in heaven and she's having a great time. Why disturb her? Why have her interfere in life? Why bother her? Rest in peace. The religious version of this is a blessed memory. Now, we had an Uncle Benny. I'll go back to my aunt, but we had an Uncle Benny. My grandmother loved Uncle Benny, and when we mentioned him, she would say a blessed memory. I had a big mouth. I go, a blessed memory? Uncle Benny went to jail. He was a crook. What kind of blessed memory? And Jews would not name someone. Nobody named their kid Benny after Uncle Benny because of the lie. He was a bigamist. He was a thief. He was a gambler. But a blessed memory, Benny. All right, now we have Aunt Bertie. By the way, I think it was Oscar Wilde who said, good friends are God's apology for the crazy relatives he gives you. So now we have Aunt Bertie, and she was a bit of a pachech, not an easygoing woman. And my grandmother made chicken soup every Friday night, and quite honestly, it didn't have a great taste and you needed salt. She was a wonderful person, but cooking was not her thing. So you did not say to Bertie, pass the salt, because the belief in the family was when she passed you the salt, she was passing you bad luck or the evil eye. So we would say, Bertie, don't bother to get up. We'll walk over down the table with the 12 people to pick up the salt. So God forbid she should touch the salt shaker. Now, by the way, I thought God growing up had two last names. Forbid was the one last name, and willing. God willing or God forbid. Not that we were so religious, but everything was prefaced by you should live and be well, it should only happen, we should live to see it. I mean, even when they were talking about going to a movie, which was like 2 hours, we should live to see it. I mean, I said to my father, what are we going to do, go blind in the movie? God forbid, bite your tongue, how could you talk like this? Meanwhile, I was making fun of the superstitions that my grandparents had and my great-grandmother had. And by the way, my great-grandmother, I don't know if I told you this, was born in Berlin, and we had a Russian side of the family. She claimed they were much more superstitious and much more ignorant than the German side of the family. Now, there is a belief that superstitions are born out of ignorance. That is not true. They are born out of anxiety. The people that have been in the jaws of history, and Jews are certainly in that category, the Irish, the Russians, African Americans, have a tremendous amount of superstitions, and rightly so, because it is a coping device. It is a way to control uncontrollable events. We all want to be existentialists. We all want to make our own luck. However, depending upon our lifestyle, you sometimes have to depend, or you use the superstition as a coping device, or you just do what I do, you follow along because you don't want to fight with the mother and the grandmother. So I laughed that I wasn't superstitious, but here's what I did on the way to school. Anybody here from the 5 boroughs? Yeah. Okay. Step on up, and you break whose back? Let me ask you a question. Why aren't we breaking the father's back? How about an uncle? How about an aunt? How about a cousin? Why does it break your mother's back? So I asked a psychologist why, a child psychologist. The reason is separation anxiety. A child is being brought up by the mother, and there's this love-hate relationship, which we see in the fairy tales. You have the good fairy and the witch, the good sister and the bad stepmother, and, you have this duality. So the mother is sending the child to school. The child is anxious. Travel has a lot of superstition attached to it. For instance, anybody who has gone to Israel, have you gone with messenger money? Yes. It is not necessarily Jewish, because the Arabs travel with messenger money too. And one of the ironies, and one of the things I want you to get out of this lecture, is it's so ironic, the antipathy right now between Arabs and Jews, when we have the exact same superstitions. If you ask an Arab to make a plan, he'll say, God willing. He sounds like my grandmother. I'm wearing an evil eye bracelet. It was bought in Cairo for me, but you can buy it in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv. It's the same evil eye. Here's one from Venice, and I'll talk about some of the other things that I'm wearing. Okay, so now step on a crack and you break your mother's back. Where did it come from? By the way, nowadays, so many mothers are working, it's going to be step on a crack and you break the nanny's back. It's not going to be the mother anymore. Well, where did it come from was about 10,000 years ago, 8,000 years ago, perhaps from Egypt. Some guy stepped on a little crack in the desert. It opened up and he thought he caused it. So the idea is you don't step on a crack and you don't cause an earthquake. Yeah, right. But it's a way of dealing with it, of doing something and feeling in control. Now, also on the way to school, what didn't you walk under? A ladder. Okay, now why didn't I walk under a ladder? I thought my grandmother said don't walk under ladders, and you see the little guy on the illustration with that sickly grin underneath the ladder. Now, I did go to school with a guy who always walked under ladders for spite, to show that nothing was going to happen to him, except once he walked under a ladder, went to school, tripped, and practically broke his leg. So I told him, Bruce, don't walk under any more ladders. I thought the reason you don't walk under a ladder is the ladder could fall on your head. I was wrong. The reason is the ladder forms a triangle. Here's the wall, here's the ladder, here's the ground. A triangle is an iconic shape that goes back thousands and thousands of years. And the Egyptians used that triangle to bury the dead, and what was it called? Pyramid, right. The belief in Egypt was, and it drifted, the belief in Egypt was that if you walked under a ladder, it is the triangle, the dead is living inside the triangle, and when you walk through that triangle, you're meeting the dead from the pyramid. Christianity tried to stamp this out. This is pagan. They don't believe in it, so the early church made a new story about it. And Jews did the same thing. One thing I want you to understand is superstition is the foundation. Religion builds on superstitions. It stands on the shoulders, which doesn't mean to say that religion is superstition, unless you're Oscar Wilde, who said somebody else's religion is a superstition. But what it is if you want to understand a culture's anxiety, study their folklore and their superstitions and their fairy tales. If you want to understand their moral and religious aspirations for the betterment, study their religion. But sometimes the practice can't be stamped out, so the church comes in, or Judaism comes in, and puts an ethical stamp on it. And that's what happened with the ladder. The idea is, has anybody been to Italy or Spain and seen pictures of crucifixes maybe in the Met? Usually there's a ladder leaning against the crucifix, correct? The early church said that if you walked into the ladder, you are going to meet the devil that caused all the suffering in the world, or you're going to meet Judas Iscariot, who caused Jesus' death. So by walking in the ladder, you are propitiating and encouraging evil in the world. So you shouldn't, for a religious reason and a moral reason, for the good of mankind, don't walk under a ladder. Knocking on wood. Now, my grandmother would not knock on wood. Why? Because she said it was a Christian thing. Well, you didn't argue with my grandmother with that finger that could cut salami and that eye that could stare you down. She was wrong, actually, and right in a way, because I did research. What happened was the church tried to stamp out knocking on wood. Judaism didn't like knocking on wood either, but for reasons of it being pagan and heathen. The church didn't like it either because they didn't believe that an evil eye lived in a tree and you should knock on wood. Or lions say a baby was ugly when the baby was pretty. You knocked on wood because Jesus was on a wooden cross. So when you sounded like you were bragging or you were too sure of yourself, you knocked on wood to remind yourself that you should be humble, like Jesus. So now it becomes a Christian thing. Now my grandmother knew about this version of knocking on wood, and that's why she didn't knock wood. But of course, she felt it was perfectly legal to do the spitting poi poi poi. Now what's the spitting? Which in Africa people spit, they spit in Ireland. If someone knocks on your door in Ireland and you go there and there's no one there, they believe that it's the evil eye or the leprechaun that's coming to get you for bad luck, so you spit out the door. Now, it just so happens, I could picture in my family, someone leans over and they spit right in your face. But spitting is another way to avert the evil eye. All right, so we talked about step on a crack, and we talked about the pyramid. Now, let's talk about today, what's going on. Now, the kids today, anybody here have grandchildren on Long Island? Because I may have interviewed them for a Newsday article I wrote. Here's the story. My children thought I was just getting like my mother. You're just getting just like grandma. Now, do you think that was a compliment? I don't think so. But the older I got, the more superstitious I became. And they thought I was, oh, you're crazy, that's ridiculous. This is an age of science and technology. And I'm driving a carpool. Anybody here from Comac, by the way? We're passing a little cemetery on Town Line Road, and all of a sudden the kids in the car become silent. They hold their breath and they go thumbs up. Do you see it on the, there's a guy in a car holding his breath going thumbs up. All right, what is that about? And then when we pass the cemetery, they yell, bunny, bunny, bunny. I didn't know, I thought maybe there was a bad odor in the car. Who knows what happened? What is this all about? Well, it turns out I did some research. The kids said they learned this on the camp bus. Crestwood, Driftwood, whatever Long Island camp they went to, on the camp bus they had punchmobiles and pinchmobiles. But what is the subtext that's important for us to understand? Kids don't walk anymore. So the walking superstitions like step on a crack. And by the way, during World War I in London, they did step on a crack and you break the Kaiser's back. World War II, step on a crack and you break Hitler's back. So that's a tough superstition. Why are they holding their breath when they pass the cemetery? Because kids told them you shouldn't breathe in dead air. Okay? The child psychologist I interviewed said kids are nervous about travel, plus they're passing a cemetery. Someone's looking at their clock, so did I do 35 minutes? All right. Let me do a couple of the brand new teenage superstitions, then I want to do some of the newer Jewish superstitions, and then I want to hear from you. I'm on steroids now. I took a fall and they put me on steroids. I'm like a motor mouth, so I need to be stopped. Okay, so the kids don't want to breathe in dead air and they're going thumbs up. What is the thumbs up? Remember the Roman gladiators? Thumbs up is life, thumbs down is death. So they're going thumbs up for life. They don't know this. They're just doing it because the friends do it. And why are they yelling bunny, bunny, bunny? Because someone in Syosset told them to yell bunny or rabbit. The reason being is rabbits and bunnies, which, you know, Easter, it was inculcated into Easter, is a sign of fertility. It's a sign of fertility. So we have the cemetery that's death, we have life. The northern state, the kids duck their heads down when they go under an overpass. Why? Because somebody told them to do it on a bus, and because they're afraid this will prevent the bridge from coming down on their head. Now, you have to think about the psychology. Do you know that all these overpasses now have gratings? Because people would throw things, and you know, so there was the anxiety. Remember, anxiety feeds the phobia. When they go over the Long Island Railroad tracks on Long Island, they lift their legs up, the kids in the back seat, and they touch plastic. So I asked them, why don't you touch wood? They had a good scientific reason. Wood disintegrates, plastic is forever. So in about 20 years, instead of knocking wood, we'll be knocking plastic. All right, so now I want to do some of the newer superstitions that have a Jewish aura to it, and we don't have time for a full cycle of life, but we'll do a couple of them. For instance, has anybody been to a wedding where the two mother-in-laws break the glass? It's called Tanayim. Before the ceremony, it's when the contract is being signed. Let me see a show of hands, because it's becoming very popular, and it's not only Jews that are doing it, non-Jews are starting to do it, just like non-Jews are breaking the glass at the end of the wedding. What is this about? The two mother-in-laws, now this goes back 500-600 years ago to Central Europe, Germany, Poland, Hungary. They broke the plates, the two mothers. There's a financial arrangement going on with the fathers. The kids are like 13 and 14. This is the engagement. The two mothers break the plate together to show they are working together for the betterment of the family. Yeah, right. Let me give you the real truth. The real truth is the mother of the bride is the alpha mother, and she remains the alpha mother unless the mother of the groom is a better ATM machine. We're living in Florida permanently and not around. Okay, so they're breaking the glass also in a reverse, like break a leg, so that the marriage contract and the marriage will not be broken. They're breaking the glass so that breaking the plate so that the evil eye will not come around to this wonderful occasion. So that's it. And the other thing is, it's a psychological thing that the mothers are alerting everybody who's watching this, that the children will eat off their own plates. They will not be eating her brisket or her spaghetti and meatballs. They will be an entity unto themselves, and the two mother-in-laws will not interfere. This is not going to happen, but it's a great idea. At the end of the wedding, the bride and groom break the glass. Why? Anybody? Why do you break the glass at the end of a wedding? Actually, it's a light bulb in most cases. Or if you go to the Jewish museum, you buy this beautiful thing that you're breaking and they make it into a Hanukkah menorah. It's very nice. Good merchandising from an old superstition. All right, so if you go and ask the rabbi, or the rabbi will announce, the temple is destroyed. Now that's interesting. The temple was destroyed twice because this superstition is older. There's a midrash that predates the destruction of the temple. So it became the destruction of the temple. If the rabbi is a comedian, he says this is the last time the groom is going to put his foot down in this relationship. I wrote about libertarian weddings and egalitarian weddings where the bride and groom both break the glass together. It is to scare away the evil eye. But like I said, there's a sexual connotation in a lot of these things. The sexual connotation. And in Africa, by the way, they break an egg being a symbol of fertility, life, the cycle of life. The groom breaks the glass traditionally to show that he has the potency to break the hymen. Luckily, we're not on the bima, because I have some worse things to discuss. But so he has the potency, and the woman better be a virgin, because in a very frum wedding going back hundreds of years, and even today in Brooklyn, the bride and groom go into a room, and from a traditional point of view, the groom is supposed to deflower the bride, and there are operations, by the way, worldwide, to put the hymen back in place. It's not just nose jobs and boob jobs. I don't know if this is the appropriate venue for this kind of a discussion, but I've done all this research, so you might as well get the benefit of it. All right, so now, in Italy, in southern Italy, they would hang out the bloody sheet, and in different parts of the world. Went on for hundreds of years. So now, since we're talking about blood, let's see a show of hands of who was slapped when they got their period. Okay, well then now I know that your relatives came from probably Russia, Poland. Okay, this is not necessarily Jewish, because in certain parts of the world, the young women, when they get their period, are slapped. So I'll tell you a little bit about my family. My mother was very progressive, and she paid for the JCC or the Girl Scouts to have a nurse come to tell us about menstruation. They did not tell us anything about procreation, just menstruation. And they gave us one of those horrible, remember those belts, that could kill you, and some kind of a flimsy pad, and we were set to go. About 2 years later, my mother was at a PTA meeting or a Hadassah meeting or at a Broadway show, who knows where. She wasn't home. I come home from school, I got my period, and I got a little nervous. Excuse me, guys, since this is not your thing, but this is what we went through. So I go upstairs to my grandmother, who was playing poker, probably with Marjorie Wolf's relative, who's here today. And she says, well, you're bothering me. What's going on? You don't look good. I said, Grandma, can we go into the bathroom to talk? She goes, why? We're bedding here. She comes into the bathroom, and I say, Grandma, I got my period. She goes, slap. I was never slapped in my life. I was too afraid. Not that I never did anything bad, but I was secret about it. So I never got into any trouble. So I said to my grandmother, why am I getting slapped? She goes, I don't know. My mother did it. That's what you do. I go, there's got to be a reason. Now I'm 13 years old. I'm an intellectual. So she says, let me think. She says, now you have to understand, my grandmother was married 3.5 times. I said, what was the half? She goes, oh, that was an annulment. So she says to me, I know why I slapped you. This is only a small portion of the beating you're going to get if you fool around with boys. Now, I had no idea what the connection was. I didn't know what fooling around was, and I didn't know where boys had anything to do with my period. So now I go upstairs to my grandmother, and I say to my grandma, I go, Grandma, don't hit me. With that, she starts to cry and laugh and slaps me in the face. I go, why? Why am I being slapped? She says, you should never have to wear rouge. It's bringing color into your body, and it's bringing blood back into your body because you're losing blood. With that, I go downstairs to sit on the stoop. Now it's like November. I had no coat on. Now I'm really upset because I didn't get this whole thing. And my mother shows up. And she goes, you have no coat, you're sitting on the stoop. Generally, I love the stoop because everything happens exciting on the stoop. You know, you could see what was going on in the neighborhood. I said, Mom, I said, Grandma and great-grandmother both slapped me in the face. With that, my mother slapped me in the face. So I said, Mom, why? Why? She goes, there is no why. This is what you do. So now you fast forward, my granddaughter is 10 years old, and already she looks like, you know, who knows what. I'm embarrassed, but I mean, I'm going to ask my daughter to give her a little tap. Now, the feminists went crazy over this. Crazy. They said it was anti-female. Looking into the research, what it is to fool the evil eye into thinking that the mother is upset. You know, it's like break a leg, but do you want Richard Burton to break a leg if he's doing Hamlet on Broadway? You say the opposite. What my grandparents didn't do is yell Mazel Tov. In Africa, it is so exciting when a girl has her period because it's fertility. It's the cult of fertility. They don't have sperm counts and they don't have ovulation dates. And do you know that there is now an app for your period so you can chart everything, when you get cramps and when you're in a bad mood. I want to end with two little stories to show you that the older my kids get, they're getting a little bit like me. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. My daughter finally became pregnant. She had a high-risk pregnancy, and it was very, very frightening and upsetting. And I had heard that her friends were going to make her a shower. She's very involved in a lot of organizations, and you know, it used to be that Jews and Spanish did not have showers because there were so many things that could happen through the centuries. I mean, my grandmother gave birth in Russia with a knife under her mattress. What was the knife? Because Lilith was going to come and take the children. So you had a knife, you know, to fight Lilith with. So I didn't say anything because my daughter is a nurse practitioner and, you know, works in a neurological practice. Somehow, the shower never took place, which I was very happy about, but for once in my life said nothing because I didn't want to start up. You have to walk on eggshells and to develop my balance. So now the baby is born, knock wood, can hurrah, poo, 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 God bless him, he was fine, and my daughter had everything delivered after the baby was born, which I approved heartily. So now I call my son-in-law, who happens to be of Danish extraction, and he's not Jewish, and I say, I want to come over, I want to bring something over, and he starts to laugh. I go, what's so funny, Henry? He says, come over and you'll laugh too. So I come over, but on my way I buy 5 tremendous red bows, which by the way, the Chinese invented the red ribbon and the red bows and the Kabbalah, it's all Chinese. So I go over and we're making up the crib, and my son-in-law starts to laugh. He lifts up the mattress, and underneath the mattress is already 2 red bows. So I said, Henry, you Danish, do the Danish people put red bows? He says, no. Your daughter called me from the hospital and made me swear I wouldn't tell you that she's getting like you, and before the baby came home, and then he says to me, and I heard in Israel they sometimes put candy in maybe we should put candy in, and they put coins. I said, all right, 5 red benzels is enough. So that was one thing. The second thing is my son David. Now my son David, He should live and be well. He's in California now. Who knows where he's going to be. Was always a wild guy. You never knew where he was going or what he was doing, and he lived by his own luck, he claims. He made his own luck. I mean, if you asked him what college he was going to go to that he knew he would get into, he said Suffolk Community or Nassau Community. And believe me, they're not so easy to get into, by the way, anymore. So this is David. David went to law school with President Obama. Now, you know what law school, and it's not Stanford, no. I'll tell you. You can think anything you want, but one thing I will tell you for sure. President Obama graduated Harvard Law. I know tons of people who went with him, and they predicted that he would be president. Okay? David didn't know him as a friend, but knew him. And I came down to Florida to pick up my mother to take her to the law school graduation. Now, my mother was always very superstitious. And my son David was a journalist for many years for Time magazine. My mother did not show around the articles. The only article she ever showed was when I wrote How to Eat Early Birds for the New York Times. And she didn't talk to me for a year after that, because it was based on her Florida. And when I got nasty letters, she wanted to call the woman up and take her out to lunch. The woman who wrote in the New York Times, I feel sorry for Mrs. Cott because her daughter has such a big mouth. Now I'm in Florida with all my mother's friends who knew me since in utero, because she moved down with 10 couples. So I'm in Florida in May to take my mother back to the graduation, and her friend Pearl, who also was a member here, looks at me and says, David's at law school? I didn't even know he went to law school. So she says, what law school did he go to? Now, I was about to say it when my mother fixed me with that finger and that evil eye. And she goes like this. So she says, what law school? I mean, are you embarrassed? So my mother looks at me and she says to Pearl, it starts with an H. So Pearl says, oh, it starts with an H. Oh, Hofstra Law, yeah. My mother looks at me and I said the right thing, close enough. Now, David spoke at graduation. Now, my mother was the only grandmother there hiding under a seat. You know, did he have to speak? You know, people could be giving him a kin of horror right now. Ma, can't we enjoy anything? That's my mother. Okay, now David, who had got a job at a law firm, and I figured, okay, this is great, because you never knew where he was going to be. One day calls me up and he says he's going to Italy. So he speaks a lot of languages, and I figured he's going for his job. I didn't know he was going to run a motorcycle company called Ducati. Anybody heard of it? Yeah, all the movie stars. He wasn't in Italy all the time. He was in Hollywood, and he had to learn how to drive a motorcycle. And all of a sudden, in order to get the job as creative director, he and his boss had to get motorcycle licenses. And they started doing crazy things, like being dropped from a helicopter onto the Swiss Alps and skiing down. I mean, this is like nutty things. So now he's also writing a book because he had been a journalist, and now he's writing a memoir. It's called Fast Company. Knock wood, it should happen. They're thinking of making a movie out of it. You can download it. Fast Company, David Mark Gross, make a mother's life happy. And he rewrote it 18 times. He wrote it for Farrar, Straus, Giroux, which is the pinnacle. And he had a very tough editor who was the editor-in-chief, calls me up 2 o'clock in the morning in East Northport, wakes me up. Now, David is my mentor when it comes to writing. He's been writing since he's 7 years old. He says, Ma, can a horror knock wood? It should only happen, God willing, God bless. Spitting into the phone. I said, David, you said you're not superstitious. He says, you know what? I'm not really superstitious, but I'm not taking any chances either. You're a great audience. Thanks a